Cobra Raven. Cobra Raven. There's no haven from the Cobra Raven, and it's on the lookout for G.I. Joe.
You might recall that a few months ago, our good friend Dan Geister sent us a box of toys that he'd found at a garage sale, and inside was the Cobra Night Raven from the G.I. Joe Real American Hero line. This was probably one of the last really cool Cobra toys in the original G.I. Joe run, much like the Tomahawk Chopper from the Good Guys fleet. And I'd never had one. I'd always wanted the Night Raven, and I never had it. And the one inside the box was in a sorry state. It looked like it had just been put through the ringer. But I cleaned it up, and it looked pretty good, but it's missing everything. It needs a complete restoration, and it also has some scratches on the body itself. So what I want to try and do is restore this for my own personal collection, and I wanted to take you along for the ride. So let's get started with disassembly. A lot of you have asked why we don't do more G.I. Joe restorations. We do a lot of Star Wars vehicle restorations, but not a lot of G.I. Joe. Well, you might notice that we do a lot of G.I. Joe figure restorations and repair, but not a lot of G.I. Joe vehicles. And conversely, we do a lot of Star Wars vehicle restoration and not a lot of Star Wars figure restoration. That's because in those two toy lines, everything's in reverse. In Star Wars, the figures cannot be disassembled, but the vehicles often can. Whereas in G.I. Joe, the figures can be disassembled, but the vehicles often cannot. A lot of the G.I. Joe vehicles were put together using tabs and clips and plastic, slot configurations, and they all go one way. So you can't get them apart without destroying them. In the case of the Night Raven, however, it's screwed together much like a Star Wars vehicle. So the first thing I'm going to do is disassemble it, get it into its component parts, and then we'll start dealing with things piece by piece. You want to be careful when you're dealing with G.I. Joe disassembly, even in a vehicle that has screws, because a lot of the ancillary parts, a lot of the little gimmicks, features, and landing gears, like the doors and things like that, they're going to be hinged on using plastic tabs and fittings that could break. So we want to be very careful when we remove these components. We don't want to end up breaking hinges, breaking clips, anything that's not reparable. Alright, so you see we have these landing gear assemblies here. I'm going to have to be very careful with them because they are hinged into the plastic. They're not attached through another mechanism. So when I start to remove these systems, I have to be careful not to break these hinges off. And I've never even had an intact Night Raven, so first few minutes I have a Night Raven, I'm taking it apart, which doesn't thrill me. Okay, well that was easy enough. That whole section just came off and all of the landing gear assembly stayed on it, which is nice. So we can get this gently out of the way. This piece right here is crucial. This is the elevator attachment point for the cockpit. You might notice here that this pin is, or this clip on the bottom is warped. It's not at a right angle to the rest of the part. That's because there was a lot of strain that was put on that piece. So I'm going to have to replace this piece in the reassembly. So I'll take note of that for later. And some of these other these other accessories, like these engine nozzles, they have damage on them as well. So if I can find replacement parts in better condition, then I'm going to swap these out. Alright, so after some careful observation and fiddling, what I've done is I'm going to lift from the back and try and slide this assembly out. Don't want to put any additional strain on any of these parts. Lifting up from the landing gears, I'm going to push forward. And then very carefully pop this out of these tabs, and this should now slide out. Boy, that was a pain in the butt. Alright, these seem to be glued in. These doors and wheels are pretty firmly in place. I don't think I want to mess with those. Somehow these landing gear doors are actually wrapped around the plastic, so I won't be able to remove these landing gear doors. They're just going to have to stay where they are. So I guess it's good that I still have them intact. I'm just going to leave these wheels and this lower bomb bay door in place, since this bomb bay door still works correctly, and it's assembled or designed with this very fragile looking clip system. So I'm just going to leave it in place. But it's good that we got this piece off, because this piece needs some TLC. It's rusty, looks gross. I'm going to sand it and paint it. Last piece we need to get out of the ship is the windshield, which just comes out with some gentle pressure. Or it should. There we go. And there it is. We're going to try something new and different here at RetroBlasting on this restoration. We're going to try and use the Novus plastic polish system to remove the deep scratches that are on this Night Raven. When I washed this Night Raven off, unfortunately there were massive scrapes and scratches on the body all along the aircraft. And it has to do with the way it was played with, and then the way it was in storage, probably laying under 20 or 30 other toys and just getting moved around and beaten up. I want to try and minimize that a little bit if I can, and I've heard that some people have had success with the Novus system. It's a 3-step system depending on the severity of the scratches. So the first thing I'm going to do is use their number 3, which is the heavy scratch remover. I have a microfiber cloth. You always want to make sure you have a lint-free microfiber cloth when you're buffing on old toys. I'm going to use number 3, and I'm going to try and wipe out the heavier scratches. And then after that, if there are fine scratches left, I'll use number 2, and then after that I'll use this plastic polish number 1 to clean and shine it up. Obviously this is not going to be a fast process. This is going to take some time. So let me get started, and then I'll jump ahead and show you the result. As you can see, the Novus polish really worked wonders. The Night Raven is never going to be perfect, but it's a lot better than it was before. We used all 3 steps of the Novus process. We used the deep scratches, and then the fine scratches, and then the polish on the plastic, and it looks pretty good. I think if you put a little more elbow grease into it and were willing to spend hours and hours and hours, you might be able to buff out all the scratches entirely. But this is a great result. Unfortunately, we had another casualty in the midst of doing this. This is why we don't do G.I. Joe vehicle restorations. Hasbro did not build their vehicles for disassembly. They did not build their vehicles to be friendly to restoration processes. I want to show you this. This is the lower fuselage of the ship, or of the aircraft, and I was attempting to reattach. Remember how I told you I wasn't going to take these landing gears out because they're held in by these tabs on the body. They're friction fit in there, and it's one way. Well, somehow this front landing gear had come out, and I had purchased a replacement, and in attempting to fit the front landing gear through those tabs by pressing it through, the 2 tabs on the back just snapped off and went flying off into the kitchen. This is typical with G.I. Joe. So I had a perfectly serviceable lower fuselage, and now I have nothing. So I'm either going to have to figure out a way to actually create a better hinge system for this and jury rig it back together, or go find an entirely new shell to build upon, which makes all of our effort on the fuselage redundant. So this is what you have to consider when you're a collector, whether or not you're going to go through the trouble of restoring certain lines of toys versus others. And I have to tell you, with G.I. Joe, with the number of vehicles and the number of toys that were made, especially with the way the vehicles were constructed, I honestly don't think it's worth it. We're going to progress with this restoration, and we're going to finish it one way or another, but I can't recommend G.I. Joe toys as restoration projects. They either need to be custom fodder or they need to be nice surviving examples when you get them. So we'll see you on part 2.